boy by the roadside. There are certain roads that seem to exist outside the world. Roads where the air feels different. Roads where silence becomes a living thing. Roads that make you glance into your rearview mirror for no reason at all. For me, that road lies in the Scottish Highlands. A narrow stretch of asphalt winding through endless forests, lonely hills, and ancient valleys where the fog hangs low enough to swallow entire landscapes. I have driven that road hundreds of times, day and night, summer and winter, rain and snow. Yet there is one journey I will never forget. A journey that began with a boy standing alone beside the road, a boy wearing a red jacket, and ended with questions I still cannot answer. My name is Daniel. I'm 34 years old. For most of my adult life, I've worked as a long-haul truck driver. It's not a glamorous profession. Most people imagine adventure when they think of life on the road. The truth is much quieter than that. Hours alone. Endless miles. Coffee that tastes like burnt water. Radio stations fading in and out between mountains. The same roads. The same service stations. The same empty nights. But after my wife died, quiet became something I needed. 3 years earlier, cancer had taken her. The illness came quickly, much faster than anyone expected. One day we were discussing holiday plans. 6 months later, I was standing beside her hospital bed saying goodbye. No amount of time prepares you for losing the person who knows you better than anyone else. People tell you that grief gets easier. Maybe they're right, but easier doesn't mean gone. Some losses simply learn how to hide better. After she died, I sold our house. The rooms felt too large, too empty. Every corner contained a memory. Her books, her favorite chair, the coffee mug she always used on Sunday mornings. Eventually, I accepted more night routes. The darkness helped. When you're driving through the middle of nowhere at 2 in the morning, your mind focuses on the road instead of the things you've lost. At least most of the time. The first time I saw the boy was during the last week of October. The weather had turned cold. The kind of cold that creeps beneath your clothes and settles deep inside your bones. A storm had passed through earlier that evening. Rain still drifted across the windshield in thin silver lines illuminated by my headlights. I was driving north toward Ullapool. The road ahead stretched through miles of forest. No houses, no towns, no traffic, just darkness. The radio had stopped working nearly an hour earlier. Not unusual in those parts. Mobile signals disappear there too. Sometimes it feels as though civilization simply ends. I remember glancing at the clock, 1:42 a.m. Another 2 hours before my destination. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee and focused on the road. That's when I saw him. At first I thought he was a road sign, then a deer, then a trick of the light. But as I got closer, the shape became unmistakably human. A child, standing beside the road, completely still. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. The boy couldn't have been older than 10, maybe 11. He wore a bright red jacket. The color stood out sharply against the darkness surrounding him. Even from a distance, something felt wrong. Not frightening. Not yet. Just wrong. Children don't stand alone in remote forests at nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, especially not in weather like that. I slowed immediately. My headlights illuminated him. For a brief second, I saw his face. Pale, expressionless, almost sad. He wasn't waving. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't moving at all. He simply stood there watching my truck approach. A chill ran through me. I reached for the radio microphone, instinctively preparing to report what I'd seen. But before I could speak, I passed him. The boy vanished from view. I looked in the side mirror. Still there, standing exactly where he'd been, watching. Then I checked the mirror again. Less than 3 seconds later, he was gone. Completely gone. I frowned. Maybe he'd stepped back into the trees. That was the logical explanation. Yet, something about it bothered me. The forest was dense. There wasn't enough time. I drove another 100 meters before pulling onto the shoulder. The engine idled loudly in the darkness. Rain tapped softly against the roof. For a moment I sat there debating with myself. Then I grabbed my flashlight. If a child really was out there, I couldn't just leave him. The cold air struck me immediately as I stepped outside. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet. Only the distant sound of wind moving through the trees disturbed the silence. I walked back along the roadside. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No boy. No movement, no voice calling for help. I reached the exact place where I'd seen him. The ground beside the road was muddy from the rain. Any child standing there should have left footprints. There were none. I scanned the forest. Tall pines stretched endlessly into the darkness. The shadows between them seemed almost solid. For the first time, unease settled in my stomach. Not fear, just confusion. I spent nearly 10 minutes searching. Eventually, I returned to the truck. The entire situation felt ridiculous. Clearly, I was tired. I'd been driving for hours. My eyes had probably mistaken a shape in the darkness. That was the only explanation that made sense. Yet as I continued north, I couldn't shake the image of the boy. The red jacket, the pale face, the sadness in his eyes. For the next few days, I forgot about it. Work kept me busy. Deliveries, paperwork, long hours. Life continued as normal. Then I saw him again. Same road, same forest, same time of night. This time there was no rain. The moon hung low above the hills, casting pale silver light across the landscape. I was driving south when the familiar flash of red appeared near the roadside. My heart skipped. Immediately, because I recognized him. The boy stood exactly as before, motionless, silent, watching. I slowed again. My pulse quickened. This wasn't possible. The same child, the same jacket, the same expression. Days apart, miles from the nearest town. I stopped the truck completely. Without hesitation, I climbed out. The cold night air wrapped around me. I pointed my flashlight directly toward him. Nothing. The roadside was empty. The boy had vanished. Again. This time I searched farther. Nearly 20 minutes. I called out. No response. The forest remained silent. When I finally returned to the truck, something had changed. The explanation of exhaustion no longer satisfied me. Twice could be coincidence. Twice could be imagination. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. And for reasons I couldn't explain, the memory followed me home. That night, after finishing my route, I barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the red jacket, standing beneath the moonlight, waiting, watching, not threatening, not dangerous, just there, as though he wanted something, as though he had been standing beside that road for a very long time, waiting for someone to notice him, waiting for someone to stop. Weeks passed, the sightings continued. Not every night, not even every week, but often enough, always the same road, always the same boy. And every time I saw him, the feeling inside me grew stronger. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else. A strange mixture of sadness and curiosity, as though our paths were moving towards something inevitable, toward an answer hidden somewhere beyond the forests and mountains of the highlands. An answer I wasn't sure I wanted to find. Because by then, one thing had become painfully clear. I wasn't imagining the boy anymore. And somehow, the boy seemed to know exactly who I was. The warning. After the fourth sighting, I stopped trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. The human mind can explain away a lot. A shadow becomes a trick of the light. A sound becomes the wind. A memory becomes a dream. But eventually there comes a point when denial requires more effort than acceptance. And I had reached that point. The boy was real. Or at least he was real enough that I kept seeing him. The strange thing wasn't fear. Most people assume that seeing the same mysterious child standing alone beside a deserted road in the middle of the Scottish Highlands would be terrifying. It wasn't. Not exactly. Every time I saw him, the feeling that settled over me wasn't dread. It was sadness. A deep, aching sadness that seemed to arrive from nowhere. As if the moment our eyes met, I could feel something broken inside him. Something lonely. Something unfinished. The feeling stayed with me long after each sighting. I began sleeping less, thinking more. And for the first time in years, the road itself started occupying my thoughts even when I wasn't driving. One evening, while waiting for my truck to be loaded at a distribution yard outside Inverness, I found myself staring at a map of the route. My finger traced the section where the sightings always occurred. The same stretch of road, the same forest, the same isolated valley. There had to be a reason, a history, a story. Every place carries one. Especially in Scotland, the Highlands are filled with old legends, ghost stories, disappearances, ancient tragedies buried beneath centuries of rain and stone. I wasn't looking for ghosts. I was looking for answers. A few nights later, I stopped at a small roadside pub I'd passed hundreds of times before. The building was old enough to look as though it had grown directly from the hillside. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows. Inside, the smell of wood smoke and whiskey filled the air. Locals sat quietly at scattered tables. Most of them looked as if they'd known one another their entire lives. I ordered a drink and sat near the fireplace. For almost 20 minutes, I said nothing. Then eventually I asked a question. Has anyone ever heard stories about a boy in a red jacket near the old forest road north of here? The reaction was immediate. Not dramatic, just noticeable. Conversations paused. Eyes shifted. A few people exchanged glances. An uncomfortable silence settled across the room. My stomach tightened. Finally, an elderly man sitting near the fire looked up. His face was lined with age. The kind of face shaped by decades of wind and hard winters. What road, I told him. The old man stared into his glass for several moments. Then he sighed. I haven't heard that story in years. A chill moved through me. What story? The old man took another sip before speaking. There was an accident. The entire pub seemed quieter now, as if everyone already knew what he was about to say. More than 20 years ago, I waited. A young boy disappeared during a storm. Disappeared. The old man nodded. His name was Jamie. The name immediately lodged itself in my mind. Jamie. He was 10 years old. The exact age I'd guessed. The old man continued. He was traveling with his parents. Their car broke down during a snowstorm. No one knows exactly what happened after that. They were stranded for hours. The father left to find help. When rescue teams finally arrived, he paused. His expression darkened. They found the mother, but not the boy. A cold sensation spread through my chest. What happened to him? The old man looked toward the rain-streaked window. No one knows. He vanished. The pub remained silent. Someone added another log to the fireplace. Sparks drifted upward. The old man continued. 3 days later, they found his body. No one spoke. He'd frozen to death. The words hit harder than I expected. For some reason, hearing them felt personal, as though I'd known the boy, as though I'd failed him somehow. Where, I asked quietly. The old man met my eyes. Along the same road you've been driving. I felt my pulse quicken. The same road, the same forest, the same lonely stretch of highlands. And suddenly, I understood why everyone in the pub had gone silent. Because stories like that never truly disappear. They linger, passed from one generation to the next, like fog rolling through the hills. I left the pub an hour later. The rain had stopped. Cold stars shone above the mountains. Yet Jamie's story followed me into the darkness, and for the first time I found myself wondering whether the boy I kept seeing wasn't simply a mystery. Maybe he was a memory, a tragedy refusing to fade. A week passed, then another. The weather grew worse. Winter arrived early that year. Heavy snow blanketed the highlands. Road conditions became dangerous. Every route demanded complete concentration. Yet despite everything, I couldn't stop looking for him. Every night I drove that road, part of me expected to see a flash of red beside the trees. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, but the anticipation remained. Then came the storm, the night everything changed. I remember the date clearly, December 12th. The forecast had warned drivers to stay off certain routes. Unfortunately, freight schedules don't care about weather forecasts. By midnight, I was already deep into the highlands. Snow hammered the windshield. Visibility was terrible. The wind pushed against the truck with frightening force. Several times I considered stopping, but I was less than 2 hours from my destination. I kept going. The road twisted through the mountains. Headlights illuminated nothing but endless snow. The landscape looked completely different. The familiar forests had vanished beneath white drifts. Even the road markings were difficult to see. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The storm seemed endless. Then suddenly, something appeared ahead. Red. My heart stopped. The boy, Jamie, standing directly in the road, not beside it, not near the trees, directly in front of my truck. My entire body reacted before my mind could process what I was seeing. I slammed the brakes. The truck lurched violently. Tires screamed across ice. For one horrifying moment, I thought the vehicle would jackknife. The trailer swayed. Snow exploded around me. Everything became chaos. I fought the steering wheel. The truck skidded sideways. Then finally, stopped. Silence. Complete silence. My breathing filled the cab. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. For several seconds, I couldn't move. I simply stared through the windshield. The road ahead was empty. The boy had vanished. Again, a nervous laugh escaped my throat. Adrenaline. Shock. Relief. I shook my head. What was I doing? I'd nearly crashed because of a ghost story. I looked forward, preparing to continue driving. And then the mountain moved. At least that's what it looked like. An enormous section of snow and rock suddenly broke free from the hillside above. The sound was deafening. A deep roar, unlike anything I'd ever heard. My eyes widened. The avalanche crashed across the road perhaps 50 meters ahead. Tons of snow, trees, rocks, everything came down at once. The impact shook the ground beneath my truck. The entire road disappeared, buried, destroyed. For several moments I could do nothing except stare. If I hadn't stopped, if I had continued at the same speed, I would have reached that exact location. At that exact moment, there would have been no chance to escape. None. The realization hit me slowly, like cold water. My hands began trembling. I looked back toward the road, toward the place where the boy had stood. Nothing. Only falling snow. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, watching, waiting, protecting me. For the first time since the sightings began, fear disappeared completely. In its place came something else. Gratitude. And a question. A question that followed me all the way home. Why me? Why had Jamie appeared to me? Out of all the people who had driven that road over the last 20 years, why had he chosen me? The answer wouldn't come that night, or the next. But deep down I knew one thing. The story wasn't over. Not yet. Because somewhere within those mountains, hidden beneath decades of silence and sorrow, Jamie was still trying to tell me something. And sooner or later, I was going to find out what it was. The last goodbye. For several weeks after the avalanche, I couldn't stop thinking about Jamie. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing in the snow. The red jacket, the pale face, the calm expression. Most of all, I remembered the exact moment before I hit the brakes. He hadn't looked frightened. He hadn't looked lost. If anything, he had looked determined, as though he had stepped into the road for a reason, as though stopping me had been the only thing that mattered. The avalanche made local news for a few days. Several roads remained closed. Engineers inspected the mountainside. Experts explained how the combination of heavy snowfall and strong winds had triggered the collapse. Everything had a logical explanation. Everything except Jamie. No newspaper mentioned him, no police report mentioned him, no weather report mentioned him. Yet I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Without him, I would have died that night. The realization changed something inside me. Before the avalanche, I had been searching for answers. Afterward, I found myself searching for Jamie. Not the ghost, the boy, the child who had once existed. The child who had somehow become trapped in the story of that road. A month later, during a break between deliveries, I drove back to the small pub where I had spoken with the old man. The winter storm had passed. The highlands were quiet again. Snow still covered parts of the hills, but sunlight had returned. Inside the pub, I found the same elderly man sitting beside the fireplace. He recognized me immediately. The truck driver. I nodded. I need to ask you something. The old man gestured toward the empty chair opposite him. I sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I told him everything. The avalanche, the sighting, the way Jamie had appeared, directly in front of my truck. The way he had saved my life. The old man listened without interruption. When I finished, he stared into the fire for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Perhaps it's time you met his mother. The words caught me off guard. She's still alive. The old man nodded. 76 now. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe I assumed everyone connected to Jamie's story had disappeared long ago. But of course, they hadn't. The accident might have happened 20 years earlier. For his mother, it had happened yesterday. Some grief never learns the difference. A week later, I found myself standing outside a small stone cottage overlooking a valley. The house looked old, weathered, lonely. the kind of place where silence settles deeply. I almost turned around. Part of me felt as though I was intruding. What right did I have to reopen old wounds? But before I could leave, the front door opened. A frail woman stepped outside. Gray hair, kind eyes, a sadness that seemed woven permanently into her expression. She introduced herself as Margaret, Jamie's mother. The moment she smiled, something tightened in my chest, because despite her age, I could immediately imagine the younger woman she'd once been, the woman who had spent decades wondering what might have happened if things had gone differently. Inside the cottage, photographs covered the walls. Family holidays, birthdays, Christmas mornings, normal moments frozen in time. Then I saw him, Jamie. The photograph sat near the fireplace, a smiling boy around 10 years old, wearing a bright red jacket, the same one. My breath caught. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Margaret noticed immediately. "You've seen him." It wasn't a question. I nodded, her eyes filled with tears. Not shock, not disbelief, almost relief, as though she'd been waiting years for someone to say those words. For the next 2 hours, she told me about her son. Jamie loved animals, loved climbing trees, loved drawing castles and dragons. He wanted to become a ranger when he grew up. He hated mathematics, loved chocolate, feared thunderstorms. The details were simple, ordinary, yet somehow they made the tragedy infinitely worse. Ghost stories often focus on death. Real grief focuses on life, the things a person never got the chance to become. Before I left, Margaret showed me something else, a photograph taken only weeks before the accident. Jamie stood beside a lake, smiling broadly at the camera. The red jacket hung loosely around his shoulders, the same smile I'd never seen during the sightings, a smile untouched by sadness. I stared at the photograph, then quietly asked the question that had haunted me for months. "Do you think it was really him?" Margaret looked toward the window, toward the distant hills. For a long moment she remained silent. Then she smiled softly. "I think some people leave this world." She paused. "And some people stay behind until they're finished." The answer lingered with me long after I left. Spring arrived slowly that year. The snow retreated. The forests regained their color. Life moved forward. Yet I couldn't stop thinking about Jamie, or his mother, or the strange connection that somehow linked all of us. Eventually I made a decision. One evening after finishing a delivery, I bought a small bouquet of flowers. Nothing expensive, just simple wildflowers, the kind a child might pick while walking through a field. Then I drove toward the road where everything had begun. The sun had already disappeared behind the mountains. Mist drifted between the trees. The highlands looked exactly as they always had. Beautiful, ancient, mysterious. I parked beside the roadside and walked toward the place where the avalanche had occurred. The landscape had mostly recovered. Nature is remarkably efficient at hiding scars. I placed the flowers near the edge of the forest. For a moment, I felt foolish. Standing alone in the fading light, talking to someone who had died decades earlier. Still, I spoke. "Thank you." The words sounded small, insufficient, but they were all I had. The wind moved gently through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. The world remained silent. I turned to leave, then stopped, because someone was standing ahead of me. My heart skipped. Jamie, the red jacket, the pale face. The boy stood exactly where he'd appeared so many times before. Only this time, something was different. For the first time, he wasn't sad. He was smiling. Not broadly, just enough. The kind of smile someone gives when they finally found what they were looking for. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The moment felt strangely peaceful. No fear, no mystery, no questions, only understanding. Then Jamie raised his hand. A small wave. Simple, gentle, a goodbye. My eyes filled with tears before I realized it. I lifted my own hand and waved back. The mist drifted across the road. For a brief second, it obscured him completely. When it passed, he was gone. Not vanished, not disappeared, gone. The difference is difficult to explain. For the first time, his absence felt complete, like the final page of a book being turned. I stood there for several minutes, listening to the wind, watching the fading light. And deep down, I knew I would never see him again. Years have passed since that evening. I've continued driving the Highlands, continued living my life, continued carrying both loss and gratitude with me. Sometimes I still stop along that road, usually with fresh flowers. Sometimes I think about my wife. Sometimes I think about Jamie. Sometimes I think about how strange life can be. A grieving truck driver, a boy who died 20 years ago, a lonely road winding through ancient mountains. 3 stories somehow crossing paths. People often ask whether I truly believe in ghosts. I never know how to answer. Maybe Jamie was a spirit. Maybe he was something else entirely. Maybe there are things in this world we simply aren't meant to understand. What I do know is this. One winter night, a boy in a red jacket stepped into the road and saved my life. And because of him, I learned something I had forgotten after losing my wife. The world can be cruel, unfair, heartbreaking, but even in its darkest corners, kindness remains. Sometimes it comes from strangers, sometimes from people we love, and sometimes it comes from a child standing alone beside a forgotten road in the Scottish Highlands, waiting 20 years for the chance to help someone one last time.